Hello, my name is Jacob. Welcome to the third part in a quick series on how to map sidewalks in OpenStreetMap using the ID editor. So in the last two videos, we got started with the ID editor, and then I showed how to draw in ways or line strings into OpenStreetMap and tag those as crossings or sidewalks. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the additional features that we might put at a crossing, talk about the different kinds of crossings that we might map. All right, so this is where we left off here. We have this unmarked crossing that we mapped across this street here. And I'm going to just talk about a couple of different things here. The first I want to talk about are curbs. So a curb is a really important feature that we can map. And the curb is generally defined as the boundary between the sidewalk surface and the road surface. So in my city, in Richmond, that's usually the boundary between concrete and asphalt. But additionally, there's usually a height boundary as well. Sometimes there's what's called a flush curb, and we'll talk a little bit about that, where the surfaces are at the same level. But usually it is either a lowered curb or a raised curb. Which indicates how high the sidewalk is above the road or vice versa. So here in this example, looking at this aerial image here and looking at these nodes, I have a hunch that these are raised curbs. I don't think that there is a lowered ramp at these locations, but I can't tell just by looking at them. So I'm going to see real quick, if I click on map data over here on the right side of the screen and I click on photo overlays, I'm hoping that if I select, say, Bing street side, and sure enough, I am lucky today, we actually have some street side imagery available to us, which is going to help a lot in figuring this out. So I just clicked on one of those overlays right here, and it actually shows me where I'm pointed as I drag around. I'll make that bigger so you can see. You can click and drag the corner there to make that bigger. And I can drag this view around, zoom in and out of it, and I can see the street side view of where I am. And it's really cool. As I scroll this around, you'll look over here and see that my the yellow sort of perspective view, I don't know what you'd call it, is moving with me, which is really nice. So I can see exactly what I'm looking at. So I'm going to zoom in here at this corner, and now I'm feeling really glad that I did, because actually that is a lowered curb. That curb, so a lowered curb is generally about 3-ish centimeters, like a flat hand's height above the road surface. If the sidewalk comes down to or meets like without a ramp but meets at that height difference or lower, then it's going to be a lowered curb. And so that's different than a raised curb, right? It's important that we decide what kind of curb it is and map it as such, because that impacts, for example, a wheelchair user's decision as to whether or not they might traverse this footway. Okay, so I'm going to go click on that node. And with that node and that node only selected, I can now see in the left edit feature panel here that there's no tags on this node. This node currently just exists as an intersection between this unmarked crossing and this sidewalk stub. But I'm going to click on this node and I'm going to tag it as a curb. So if I type curb into this search bar, there's actually a few different options here. And these are important, so I'm going to go through them really quickly. The first is just a catch-all curb tag. And really what this means is that there's a curb there. I know that there's a surface change, but I don't know if it's a lowered curb or a raised curb. I don't have that information. So that's kind of the lowest common denominator of sorts. But it's still very useful to have, and it denotes that more information is needed. A flush curb is sort of what I was talking about there, where if there's less than 3 centimeters of height difference, we're going to call it a flush curb, where the surfaces just come and meet each other. It's still a curb because there's a surface change, and there's sort of a semantic change of like what kind of thing you're on, like you step off of the sidewalk into the road, you know what I mean? But there's no height difference, so it's a flush curb. Rolled curbs are pretty specific. Hopefully you can kind of imagine what that looks like, but it's like a raised curb, but it has this sort of rolled, like rounded style to it. They're pretty distinct. If you're familiar with a rolled curb, you can usually notice it pretty quickly. And then a raised curb is basically any height difference above that 3 centimeter threshold. Usually these are like the sort of half step curbs that I often run into around my city. You might as well. And then a lowered curb, this is an interesting one because it actually captures 2 different scenarios. It could be 2 flat surfaces that meet 3 centimeters or less in height difference, or it could be a sidewalk ramp that comes down to the road surface. And those 2 are considered lowered curbs. We tag them similarly because they have similar accessibility characteristics, and at some point we have to draw the line between specificity and pragmatism. So in this case, this is a lowered curb where the sidewalk has a ramp down into the road surface, and that lip, generally speaking, as long as it doesn't look, abnormally high, I generally trust that it was installed correctly and therefore it is minimal height above the road surface. So I'm going to say this is a lowered curb. And then if there was a strip of tactile paving here, it would be very valuable for me to say that it does have tactile paving. I checked that box. But equally valuable is to check that box again and say specifically that no, there is not tactile paving, which is the case here. So there are 3 options here, right, for tactile paving. Unknown, yes, and no. And I'm going to go with no here. Okay, so let's look at this other curb. And this is actually really interesting. This looks to be a raised curb. So if I select this curb, and I'm actually just going to type raised, and that first option there is what I'm going to select. This is a raised curb, and it does not have a tactile paving strip. So I'm going to select no here by clicking on that twice. All right. So that is, I think, a good little introduction to curb nodes. I'm going to save the crossings unmarked or marked conversation for the next video. So please tune in for that to get more. Thanks so much. Bye.